My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Rick Snizek, the executive editor of the Rhode Island Catholic Weekly Diocesan newspaper. Mr. Snizek appeared last year to discuss his visit to Israel shortly after the terrorist attack on October 7th. Welcome back to State of the State.
Richard, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This program will focus on what is happening now in Israel, particularly in Gaza and in the north, and the ongoing situation in Ukraine. Mr. Snizek, have you had any recent contact with anyone in Israel? What have you heard?
I have some contacts in the pontifical mission for the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, and they periodically send out reports, and I still keep in contact with Joseph Hasboon, whom we spoke about in the last interview. And his latest report was that there are more than 400 Christian families sheltering in a church right now in sort of central Gaza, the part that hasn't been destroyed yet. The north has been really hit hard. 30 Palestinian Christians have been killed, 19 of those through direct airstrikes by the Israelis, casualties of the airstrikes, and another 11 because of lack of medical care.
Wow. So were these people out? Were they wounded? When you say lack of medical care, or did they just become ill?
Yes, they had been wounded and they were unable to be treated properly, and they succumbed to their injuries.
So it's highly unlikely that a Palestinian Christian would be a member of Hamas. Am I correct in assuming that?
Correct, yes. And then the Church of St. Periphas was struck by Israeli missiles a few months ago, and pretty much to knock out the infrastructure of it. So the Palestinian Christians there assert that it was a deliberate effort, to dislodge them as well, because they destroyed the solar panels, they destroyed the generator, and other parts of the infrastructure of the church, which was a safe haven, a safe harbor for people there. So even a lot of the Muslims, because most of the people there that the Christians support were the Muslim community as well.
A few days ago, former British Ambassador Alistair Crook said that Israel has launched several probing attacks into Lebanon to test the Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces there. Most experts say that Israel cannot wage war against Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, and the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank without American support. Mr. Snizek, why does it appear that the Netanyahu government is widening the war? Is the United States, and I include Democrats and Republicans, encouraging Israeli aggression?
Israel has long had issues with the Hezbollah in the north, in southern Lebanon, from the town of Sur, which is a heavily Christian area as well. But they've been launching many attacks over the years. I think we spoke in the last show about the app I had when I went to Israel, called Red Alert, which it chimes constantly, still even now that I have it still on my phone, detailing all of the strikes or incursions into the country, drones, human crossing of the border. So it's constant from the north. I mean, every morning, I think at like 5 a.m. this morning, my phone was chiming, because I still maintain it just to keep.
Did you get under the bed or anything? Or just
I did not. Well, okay. You remember the one in Ashkelon?
Yes.
I went out to the balcony
yes.
As it came in. But the reason is Iran is really trying to alleviate some of the pressure on Hamas in Gaza by forcing the Israelis to divide their forces and to send more to the north. Hamas, Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was very upset at the beginning. He actually made some statements against Hezbollah, saying, when are you going to join this conflict? Because we thought you were going to go right away, and that was the plan. But the Israelis hit so hard back that Iran was hesitant to do that. But now they're still operating behind the scenes. But there are many in the Netanyahu government that want to really create a buffer to go into the Litani River in southern Lebanon. It's 30 kilometers, but 18 miles north of the Israeli border, is sort of the demarcation line, and that's where many of the hardliners in the Israeli government, they want Hezbollah pushed back beyond that, because it'll diminish the range of the rockets. But Israelis are being killed every day. There was a soldier killed recently in the attack. So that's what's happening on a daily basis. But the attacks from Lebanon have increased exponentially.
Is the river that you talked about, is that in Lebanon? Or
Yes, the Litani River is in southern Lebanon. It's runs east to west, and that's sort of seen as a natural demarcation line. And it's about 30 kilometers, 18 miles north of the Israeli border, and that's what has been sort of the de facto line that many in the Israeli government want to push Hezbollah back. They actually want to go in and make another incursion into southern Lebanon.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They want to now. You can argue that Gaza is really part of the Israeli territory that was given to them. However, what you're saying is that Israel is, at least the hardliners want to go into another sovereign country, namely Lebanon, keep going to push Hezbollah farther back. Is that,
yes.
Okay.
And they're the same hardliners that don't want aid to go into Gaza as well. The Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, whom I met at the Knesset a year and a half ago at Christmas time during a conference in Jerusalem, they don't want any of that, and they're expanding settlements as well in the West Bank at a rapid rate. Another 1,800 homes, I believe, were approved for expansion. So they're really firing on all fronts and sort of almost oblivious to it. It's almost like the car is careening down the highway, but they're not. They think they could just divide the forces up and attack and win on these different fronts. But
they can't do it without American aid.
They can't do it without American aid. It's true. Yes.
The bigger question for me is whether the attack on October 7th, which was certainly horrific and unprovoked as far as we can tell, is being used by Israel as retribution or genocide against all Palestinians. Netanyahu has come out and proclaimed that Israel will dominate from the river to the sea.
Right.
Is Israel engaged in ethnic cleansing?
Well, no one would ever admit to that, and I can't see that would be a means to do it. I mean, they're responding to the attack, so I think just like the United States would, if something happened to us over our southern border, we would go in with fury and attack those that attacked us. But the issue is they're unwilling to sacrifice ground troops. So right now, the last time I checked the count, I think it was 249 Israeli IDF soldiers had been killed in the conflict. If they hadn't used the precision weapons, the missiles and such, the count would be much higher. But arguably, less civilians would have been killed so far in that. Because like I told you last time in my hotel in Ashkelon, I watched at night, like 2 in the morning, the 2 planes at a time, 2 fighters would come, or 2 bombers would come in, they'd slow the engines, they'd glide, and then 20 seconds later, I got to predict, when it was going to happen, and you could just hear the boom, 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 boom of many, even the ground would shake. So that was indicative of larger scale attacks in which you can't avoid having collateral damage. So they knew that. They knew that going in, what was going to happen. Did anyone expect over 30,000 so far? More than half of them children. I would like to think that it wasn't planned that way. That it wasn't a cleansing of that sort. But I think that was driven mainly by the desire not to sacrifice IDF troops in that way. But there were many bombs. It was 24 hours. I mean, even when I was down there, it was constant all day and night. It was just constant bombing on the enclave.
I follow several analysts familiar with the situation in Israel. One of them, Max Blumenthal, is a Jew who reads the Israeli newspapers and knows people in the government. The IDF, as you're describing, they've actually dropped leaflets encouraging civilians to go to areas where they will be safe, and then there are reports that they're bombing them with cluster bombs. Israeli forces are blowing up hospitals in Gaza, claiming that there are tunnels underneath, and then afterwards they don't locate any tunnels. There are reports, fairly well documented from neutral sources, that the IDF is firing on civilians lined up to get food and water. And there's real surveillance that I've seen, aerial surveillance of IDF forces desecrating graveyards in Gaza. Do you think these reports are credible? And if so, why do they get so little media coverage here?
I would think they are credible because I follow as well, many different sources, because you can't, as you know, you can't just listen to one or two. I mean, you have to take them in the aggregate and then, use your own judgment to decide between them and the knowledge that you have. But There have been strikes on the food market where people have gathered. The recent aid delivery in the convoy, the soldiers fired on them, and at first they denied it, but then it was proven that, that it did happen when the truck came in last week, and that I think 18 or more or something were killed, and the trucks themselves drove over the people. So, and then there was another incident right now that someone's being reprimanded. One of the IDF Hiram, his name is the commander. He blew up, I think, the only remaining Gaza university. He detonated, and he didn't have authorization to do that. So now he's being reprimanded. But they claim that they had found some tunnels, and it's very plausible that it could have been used because Hamas, obviously did do that. They secreted themselves in some of those places. But even though they were already exfiltrated from there and had gone out into hiding elsewhere, they still took it upon themselves to bomb and destroy the university. So in a way, that does play into what you had said before about the genocide, because if you don't have places, the infrastructure left to study, to create a means to survive there, then what good is it? What is the overall intent of it? Mm-hmm.
This morning, President Joe Biden, I believe it was on CBS News, said that if Netanyahu attacks the city of Gaza, where Israel has told Palestinians to go to be safe, Biden, will cut off aid to Israel. Because this was, he called it his red line. At the same time, the United States Army transport ships, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, the Army does have ships, has left Virginia with supplies to build a harbor or of sorts in Gaza so that relief aid can get there without having to cross the southern border where it is being held up by the IDF. Do you have any idea why the supporters of Israel in Congress and the administration insist on tying military aid to Israel to increasing security on our southern border? I mean, earlier you said if we were being invaded from the south, there are those who argue that's exactly what's happening now with millions of people from 130 different countries coming into this country without documentation.
Yes.
Why are they tying the military aid to Israel? Right. To this, they're trying to package it up as...
Yes, because there's a move, there's that sort of dichotomy between the leadership that especially the House leadership right now, that they won't vote on any aid. They want to have it separate. But there's, the Democrats are desperate to kind of tie them together because they know that border money would have to go through. So it seemed like there was a reasonable compromise from what I could tell from the plan, but it didn't pass, which would have fulfilled both requirements, because I've been down to our southern border as well. I've been to San Ysidro in California and Nuevo Laredo and Ciudad Juarez, and it's very difficult down there. I mean, I witnessed myself people coming over the border on a nightly basis, helicopters flying. It's almost like what you see overseas. So there does need to be a better system of control in that way. It is a process to come into the country, but that's the reason for it, because they need to. It's the only way it's going to get the aid, and really more so than Israel, because that would be easier to get through. But as you have coming up with Ukraine, that's what really is the sort of the sticking point right there. So they're really trying to package it together that way to get things. Like people put earmarks into a piece of legislation to get it passed, and then there'll be a little something for the others as well. So it's sort of like that. It's to make the combination.
Mr. Blumenthal, who I referred to earlier, claims that the policy of the Netanyahu government is to squeeze the surviving Palestinians, in other words, those who haven't been killed, out of the southern border of Gaza into the Sinai Desert, which is really Egypt, and that there are Zionist settlers just waiting to go into Gaza to reclaim the land for Israel. Do you think this is Israel's goal, really?
Well, I found something odd recently. Benny Gantz, who was the co-prime minister with Netanyahu, but he he sort of shafted him on his opportunity to do it. It was like they were going to have a rotating presidency or prime ministership, and it didn't happen. So he recently moved down to the border. So I thought that was kind of curious. Is it just more than making a statement to show that it's safe to live there? He seems to be a little more reasonable than that. Now, he was in the United States recently, and he met with our defense officials just last week. But as far as Israel, Egypt has been about outside, south of the Rafah border, I think going back maybe a mile or so, there's been a move afoot, sort of quietly over the last few weeks, to like dig trenches, to build fences and walls and sort of section it off. So it's almost like an anticipation of something coming over. But President al-Sisi in Egypt, he is adamant. He doesn't want these things. And, you know, and I've been to Egypt as well. And in Cairo, you see armed people, security police on the roads because they're trying to suppress the Muslim Brotherhood and sort of those fundamentalist movements. They don't want that. It's another rise to power in that way. So they're afraid that some of those folks will come over in that too and help to destabilize the Egyptian government. So they have very serious security concerns. So I find that curious that that's happening right now, that it's almost like in preparation for something, but it's not being talked about. But they don't want to let them go any further than that.
Let's turn to the conflict in Ukraine that's been going on for over 2 years now. The Russians are being accused of many of the atrocities the Israelis are allegedly committing in Gaza. And the Rhode Island Catholic has printed 2 opinion pieces by syndicated Catholic columnist George Weigel, who is affiliated with the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington. Mr. Weigel is a strong supporter of the war in Ukraine. On February 29th, the headline you wrote for Weigel's column, The Catholic Difference, was, and I quote, "2 years on, still unbroken." In it, Weigel lauds the, quote, heroic acts of valor sustained by remarkable social solidarity by the Ukrainian resistance. Yet he admits that hundreds of thousands of soldiers, volunteers, and civilians have died, and, quote, "It is likely that $1 trillion worth of damage has been done to the economy. It is estimated that 25% of Ukrainians, many of them men of military age, have left the country, mostly to Poland, and have no desire to return. And this has resulted in the conscription of teenage boys and men in their 50s who are thrown into trench-style warfare with little training." Do you subscribe to Mr. Weigel's position on this war?
Well, first of all, his headline is his own. Like, they're the ones that come out of the Denver Catholic, where he's syndicated from there, from the Denver Catholic. But George Weigel is from that time where he was very, very close to Pope John Paul II, for 25 years, for his entire, exhaustive pontificate, that very long time that he was as served as the pontiff. So he's very, very close to him. And at that time, as you know, Pope John Paul was, protecting Poland, from Russian aggression. And he stood against it and sort of peacefully protested in that way. So Weigel was very, very close to him. So it's not unusual for him to adopt that viewpoint of Russia being the enemy,
the bad guy.
The bad guy in this. Although he does assert too that 600, I think, houses of worship in Ukraine were struck by Russian munitions. So that's another point of contention for him too, because he is a religious writer. So that helps to fuel his
we just talked about the Israelis striking a religious compound.
Exactly.
Can you tell us, do you have any idea, do you know why Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine? Have you ever looked into that?
Why he began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, and today, as a matter of fact, today in the news, in the last 12 hours or so, there have been reports coming out of there from Budanov that they are focused on getting back in there, that they've been taking out the Black Sea Fleet for a reason, and they're going to focus their energy on regaining Crimea. Maybe they figure they're going to regain Crimea and give up Donetsk or something in the east. But he realized why he chose this moment in time. I don't know exactly why he would have done it now, but he has long had his eyes set on regaining that crown jewel, and which is Kyiv itself, the capital of Ukraine. He always envisioned, retaking that because it'll sort of reunify Russia. So maybe he feels in his later years now that he wanted to, would like to do that, and this is a time to do it. I don't know exactly why he chose this moment in time to do it, but it's a good 10 years, well, 8 years since he invaded Crimea, to very little pushback. So perhaps he felt the same way, that there would be very little pushback. He probably didn't expect this. And it also re-energized NATO and expanded. Even Sweden just became a member.
And Finland.
And Finland, that's right. Sweden just put the flag this week. Pope Francis has made some news in that he was almost calling for the white flag. He said that I'm trying to remember exactly how he phrased it.
It takes courage to negotiate under the white flag.
Right, and that's the most courageous nation would be the one to go first and put the white flag to initiate discussions and such.
To which Vladimir Zelensky replied, he dismissed the Pope's call for peace. Allow me to present somewhat of a contrarian viewpoint, if I might, for our audience. When the Soviet Union collapsed, then President Nikolai Gorbachev agreed that Ukraine would become a neutral country, provided that NATO did not expand and would not try to include it in the Western alliance. Ukraine at the time possessed a large stockpile of nuclear weapons, which Russia reclaimed. Overtures toward the involvement of NATO in Ukraine started under the Biden administration, wherein a CIA-backed overthrow of the last democratically elected government was actually overthrown, and our involvement there became larger. The CIA has admitted that it has 12 to 14 secret bases there, where they're training spies to spy on Russia. The first female ambassador to NATO was a woman named Victoria Nuland, who's a career diplomat. And she and her husband were actually stationed in Moscow for a time where she developed a hatred for all things Russian. And she has met with President Zelensky several times. Reuters has reported, as I just said, that Zelensky has rejected the Pope's call for negotiations. For over a year and a half, observers such as retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor, University of Chicago Professor Emeritus John Mersheimer, and former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter, who speaks and reads Russian, have said Ukraine cannot win a war with Russia. When recently Tucker Carlson, who's fairly well known, conducted an interview with President Vladimir Putin for over 2 hours. Many mainstream media reporters would give their eye teeth for such access. Yet Carlson is being described, among other things, as a lickspittle for Putin by none other than George Weigel, which I think is a little bit beyond the pale. Now, in the interview, Putin says he has no desire to invade any other European countries, would only do so if they were attacked or by one of them or NATO intervenes. Yet he's being compared to Adolf Hitler, who, let's say, did say the same things in the 1930s, and we all know how that happened. Do you really think that Vladimir Putin has designs on recreating the Soviet Union? Is that, I mean...
Well, I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, he would like to, for completeness, but you're exactly right that he's worried about the encroachment of NATO on his doorstep. But ever since 2014, I think that they've been advocating for it to return to NATO, and nothing has happened on it. There's been no traction. The conflict, though, has re-energized that. So, and those are legitimate concerns. I mean, we wouldn't want, Russia, when they were in Cuba, we had, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were very close to us, and we had to, we were very concerned about that. So that is it is a legitimate concern of Putin, certainly, to have, see the expansion of NATO forces on his doorstep. So, but I think also, some of the things that I've looked into over the time is that is sort of the crown jewel of the empire. When he lost that, he was when Russia lost that was a detriment to the country and its history and its culture. So,
yeah. I mean, I thought I don't think Russia lost it as much as we were concerned that Ukraine had all these weapons when the Soviet Union broke up, and the quid pro quo was, I'll let you be neutral, Russia, you got to take those nukes back. And I think this is an area that is so difficult. A lot of these observers that I've spoken about have also said that Putin initially went into Ukraine with really a token force because he wanted to send a message to NATO that enough is enough. You guys really have to understand that this is, the word Ukraine can be translated to borderland, the borderland in Russian. And he just said, that's it, I'm going to send you a message. However, the Ukrainians fought back, and with our assistance, and some from the British and the Germans. But by and large, most of the support has come from the United States. And they were able to inflict a lot of casualties, but the Russians have now hardened the line, and I don't think they're going to give back the territory that they've taken because most of it is ethnically Russian speaking. Yes,
and they've just retaken Avdiivka in the east as well. And some more news to that effect from Poland. They're not ruling out putting NATO troops, saying that NATO troops could be used in Ukraine itself. So that's been another development today in the past 2 days.
Really?
As well, yes.
Well, the president of France also kind of said the same thing, but on the other hand, for example, the president of Hungary said absolutely not. So even within NATO, there's not a unanimity of agreement that, okay, this is what we're going to do. And the last thing I think we want is a widening of the war, because certainly if Russia is a nuclear-powered superpower, and not what it was on the days of the USSR, but nonetheless, if they are threatened, and Putin thinks they are threatened existentially, all bets are off. And we do not want this widening of the war. I don't think, from a religious perspective or political, it would be
hundreds of thousands on both sides have been lost.
It'd be awful.
It's been traumatic.
Now, Putin has offered some peace terms and negotiations, and the fact is that where they've set them up, the United States State Department has sent representatives to say, yeah, we don't want you doing it. So it's hard for some of us to get our arms around the fact that while we're trying to avoid war and conflict, and yet we seem to be somewhat enabling it, because we certainly are supplying the vast majority of the stuff that the Ukrainian military has used and is using. Some would argue that we are testing some of the stuff to see if it really works on the battlefield.
I've heard that as well, yes. Field testing our battle equipment.
And recently, it was the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who came out with a statement that the billions of dollars that we are sending to Ukraine are technically loans, or they're coming back to us because a lot of the money is being spent with American defense contractors, which is kind of a circular argument that I really don't think we want to get into. But I think all we can possibly do, and I know here in this Lenten season, we all should be praying for peace, not only in Israel but in the Middle East, because no good comes from war, and we know that there's casualties on both sides. And certainly, I don't want anyone to leave with the impression that I am supporting what Hamas has done and the attacks and so forth. And I know you don't either, having been there. So this has been wonderful. I wish we had an hour to talk, and we really appreciate the fact that you've come back again, and hopefully you'll come back in the future, and we'll talk about some other issues.
Glad to be on. I still keep in contact with many people there, some of the hostage families. A woman who got her 2 children back, her husband, or her estranged husband, is still in Hamas captivity.
Wow.
So it's difficult.
We'll talk about that next time.
Yes.
And we want to thank our audience for watching State of the State.